right. Well, appreciate y'all having me tonight. My name's Ian Bryant. I'm the Senior Transportation Planner with HNTB. I'm the Consultant Project Manager on COG's DFW High Speed Transportation Connection Study, DFW High Speed Rail for short. So I do have obviously a presentation today, but I want to keep it more informal. So if y'all want to stop me along the way and ask questions, feel free. I hope to allow plenty of time at the end to talk Q&A as well. I'm going to give you a little project overview, talk about kind of progress to date, talk about some specifics to Arlington, then next steps, and then open it up to Q&A. So bigger picture, looking at the state of Texas, we're here in purple on the map here. You can see our project, the Dallas, Arlington, Fort Worth project. In gold, we have the Dallas to Houston high-speed rail, which I'm sure most of you are aware of. Previously, Texas Central leading that effort for quite some time. Now it looks like Amtrak's getting involved and likely will be taking the lead on that moving forward. An important project for the state. We would tie into that at the Dallas station and obviously be sort of an extension across to Arlington and Fort Worth. So that's an ongoing project with Dallas to Houston. We've got our project, and then on the western side of the Metroplex, COG had previously done a feasibility study looking at potential high-speed connections between Fort Worth, Austin, San Antonio, and Laredo, possibly on to Monterrey, Mexico. So they had looked at that previously. Obviously, looking to really connect what we call the Texas Triangle. So, the Dallas-Fort Worth region, Austin, San Antonio, Houston, and Bryan-College Station. We're a huge state, but the vast majority of our population is in that Texas Triangle. Lots of obviously congestion, lots of growth that's occurring. It's just getting worse. So looking at what are mobility options and how could we improve mobility throughout the state. So this is one of the options that they're kind of looking at for a statewide plan, sort of we call it the upside down U. That's one thing we're looking at. Our specific project, we're looking to obviously provide mobility options and reliable connections within the region, as well as to this larger statewide system to connect the Texas Triangle. Ultimately, is our goal of this project is to get it environmentally approved. So we're in that process right now. Talk a little bit more about that here in a second. The Regional Transportation Council is our sort of governing council who's overseeing providing guidance on our study. They have a couple of policies in place that we're abiding by, which are the 3-station concept. So a Fort Worth station, an Arlington station, and a Dallas station, as well as a 1-seat ride. So for folks coming from Houston who want to continue on to say Arlington or Fort Worth or vice versa, being able to just stay in your car, train car, doors open, people come on, get off, they close, you continue on your ride, on your journey to Arlington and Fort Worth. Worst case, they're looking at a cross-platform connection. So maybe if you do have to change trains, it's literally just get off your train, walk a few feet over to a train on the adjacent platform and continue your journey. So those were two important policy, two of their policies that we're required to adhere to. Another option that that's being considered, as they call it, the Texas T-bone option. So that one really uses the Dallas to Houston high-speed rail as the backbone of the Texas high-speed rail system. That would be kind of your first, obviously, phase. And then for connecting Austin, San Antonio, and Laredo, you would actually peel off of that Houston alignment, kind of going through the College Station area over to Austin and then down to San Antonio and Laredo. So obviously some efficiencies here in terms of less infrastructure, but a couple options that are still on the table of sort of that statewide, how will this look? And then I should point out that it doesn't preclude anything potentially happening between Fort Worth and down 35, but this is another option people are considering. So our project really has been divided into two phases. The first phase that we worked on for a couple of years was really the alternative development. So looking at a variety of alignments in the DFW region, looking at various technologies as well, which we'll get into in here in just a second. And then doing that through a 3-level screening process, determining one alignment, one technology, and then carrying that into phase 2, which is where we are now. We've actually completed conceptual engineering. We're in the environmental process. So we're working on the environmental assessment as we speak. Started that in March and we have a 12-month period to complete that. So looking to complete that in March of 2025. Also currently developing preliminary engineering plans, and then we'll be getting into financial and project management plans, as well as extensive public and agency engagement. We had a lot of that in phase one. We're gonna have a lot more of it in phase two. Everything from these types of meetings to, more formalized public hearings and things like that. So a little bit on background and progress we've made through phase one and phase two. This spaghetti was our initial set of alignments. So I think we had 43 alignments that we had looked at connecting the stations. As I said, we put those through the 3-phase screening process and ultimately got down to one alignment, which I'll share here in just a second. And we also looked at a variety of transportation modes or technologies, I should say. Everything from conventional rail, like what we have with the TRE here in North Texas, to higher speed rail, like the Acela trains up in the Northeast US. High speed rail, like they were proposing between Dallas and Houston. We looked at magnetic levitation, some examples of that in Asia. And then we looked at what else is out there. We looked at emerging technologies like Hyperloop, and then really we had an outreach to the industry to see what else is coming and how soon is it coming. Is it something that could be feasible for our region? We really wanted to look at the gamut of every technology that's out there. Ultimately, through all of our screening process, we got down to high-speed rail as our preferred technology, and then our alignment centered on I-30. So our alignment that we're moving forward with through the environmental process, 85% of it is located within the I-30 right-of-way. Obviously, that's important because we're in an urbanized area. It's a large infrastructure project. Staying within a existing transportation corridor really minimizes those impacts we would have to the community. And so one of our goals all along was to try to stay within transportation corridors as much as possible. So here we've achieved that with 85% of it being in I-30. It is completely dedicated right away, so it's completely grade separated. There are no at-grade crossings anywhere along the alignment. We do have some sections that are in tunnel. We have some sections that are in a trench, and then we have some sections that are elevated. So starting in Fort Worth, our Fort Worth station is an underground station. It's right next to the existing Fort Worth Central Station. There'd be connections for pedestrians from our high-speed rail station to there, as well as to other spots around downtown Fort Worth. We'd be in a tunnel going under I-35W, staying in the 30 corridor, but being in a tunnel until we get approximately to Beach Street. At that point, we get into a trench. And so I'll show you what that looks like here in just a second. But we're working with TxDOT Fort Worth. They're redesigning I-30 between downtown Fort Worth and Cooper Street in Arlington. We're working hand in hand with them to integrate our project in the middle of their alignment. So we have regular meetings with them, and we're working through those as they design, we design, and we're designing together. So we would be in a trench in the middle of I-30 from essentially Beach Street all the way through to Cooper. At which point then we dive back down into a tunnel. The Arlington station would be an underground station as well, and we'll zoom in on that here in a minute. And then we'd continue in a tunnel through 360 and 161 interchanges until we get to Grand Prairie, where then we transition from a tunnel to elevated. So we'd actually be on columns, still within the I-30 right-of-way, but continuing east on I-30 into Dallas. And then as we get to Hampton, then we peel off of I-30 and cut through West Dallas here, getting quickly to the Union Pacific Railroad right-of-way. So we're about 100 feet off of there, but we parallel that through West Dallas, across the Trinity River, over 35E, and then we start south past the Hyatt and Union Tower, connecting into that Dallas station, which is an elevated station. That station is part of the Dallas to Houston project, so it's a fixed point, and we're just tying into that where it's planned today. Real quick, I just want to show you a couple of typicals of what this looks like. So here's the trench option. This shows you what it would be like going down I-30 in Tarrant County. We'd be, somewhere between, it varies, somewhere between 5-10 feet in a trench below the roadway. And the purpose of that really is, high-speed rail obviously needs to stay more flat. There's a good amount of hilly areas in Tarrant County. The roadway does a lot of up and down. You can do that. We can do that with cars. High speed rail, you need to be more flat. So we're setting it up to where we can actually change our elevation compared to the roadway to do what we need to do to keep the same grade or close to the same grades going through those areas. The elevated sections, this would be like what we have in Dallas, still within the I-30 right of way, but adjacent to the roadway instead of in the middle. You're looking at about 43 feet across. These are on columns, which I'll show you an example of here in just a second. I think about 25, 30 feet typically in the air on the top. You would have the catenary system, so that'd be providing electricity to the trains that would be running here. But this was an example of typically what you'll see on the Dallas side. Here's a couple images. This is California high-speed rail. It's under construction at the moment. You can see kind of what we would be talking about in terms of those elevated sections in Dallas. Here you can see an example cutting across an existing transportation corridor. So again, completely grade separated, no interaction in terms of there's no grade, completely grade separated there, and no impact to that existing roadway.
My portable power bank.
So we're in phase 2 right now. Like I said, we're in the environmental phase. It's a 12-month process. We began that in March of 24, so just a couple months ago, and that'll be continuing until March of 25. We're looking at all of the potential effects, both positive and negative, to the environment, to the built environment, to the natural environment, to the social impacts as well. Everything from air quality and noise and vibration impacts to community facilities or neighborhoods, the water systems, just the full gamut that's required as part of the NEPA process. Once we've identified existing conditions and potential impacts and effects, then we look at how can we avoid some of these, how can we mitigate some of these. Do we maybe need to come back and is a noise wall that makes sense to go in here to avoid some noise impacts to potentially a neighborhood next to us. Again, the good news is we are predominantly within the I-30 corridor, so we're already talking about a loud corridor. The impacts of high-speed rail shooting by every now and then, it's not going to make much of a difference in terms of noise. So it very much helps us from an environmental perspective to be within that I-30 corridor. So let's zoom into Arlington a little more. As I said, coming from Fort Worth, you've got the, of course, ballpark and the other sports facilities down here, Six Flags over here. So coming from Fort Worth, you're in that trench that I showed you. In this section between Cooper and Center, there's a portal. So in that portal location, that's where we're starting to dive down into a tunnel. Here we'll be fully in a tunnel under I-30, under Center, under Collins, and then at AT&T Way, that's where the station location is been recommended by the city and other stakeholders that we've worked with. That's where they'd like to see it, which obviously makes sense in terms of connections to other major areas. That is an underground station. And then it would continue on in a tunnel east of there, as I said, through 360, 161. Obviously, as y'all know, there's a lot of built up environment around these interchanges. So there's really no possible way to go around it without major impacts. It's impossible to go over it. So we're staying in a tunnel and going under it. We would allow for the track work here, would allow for some trains to stop at Arlington. Other trains would be able to just express through. So it would just be dependent on what the operator needed at that specific time. So these stations aren't like what we're used to in terms of, our DART light rail stations or our Tex rail stations out in Fort Worth. These really are destinations in their own right. So these, in some ways, are almost kind of small airports. They're multimodal connections, bringing in every transportation option you can think of and providing connections there. But also not just transportation, there are lots of mixed uses. So you got everything from hotel and retail to housing to everything. It's a full mix. This example here is in San Francisco. This is a new transit center they have called the Salesforce Transit Center. It's ready to accommodate the high-speed rail, but as you can see, it's multi-level and accommodates essentially every type of transit you could think of that comes into that area. So this is the type of thing we're talking about when we talk about these Fort Worth, Dallas, and Arlington stations. There's a lot of opportunity for connection, but also for, that dense development around it that allows a lot of walkability. This is just another example. This is Miami. This is the Bright Line. So again, as you can see, up on the columns, like I was talking about, but really integrates well into that urban environment where it's located. So it really works well with that setting. Another thing I wanted to briefly mention, this is not part of our study, but is related, obviously. The Council of Governments is also looking at a potential people mover connection, which from the Arlington station, it would be, again, completely grade separated. It'd be in its own dedicated right of way, and potentially, the technology isn't decided yet, but some sort of a people mover could be autonomous, that provides a connection from the Arlington high-speed rail station through the Centerport TRE station up into DFW Airport. So I know they've had conversations going on with the airport, even just recently, about looking into this. So just something to keep in mind. We're not just talking about connections between Fort Worth, Arlington, and Dallas, but also potentially a related project that connects you up to the airport through Arlington. So really everything we're looking at here is just connection. So connecting people locally, connecting regionally, obviously connecting in from Dallas, Arlington, to Fort Worth. We're then able to connect into the DART's light rail system, to the commuter rail system, to Tex Rail out in Fort Worth, to TRE, to all of the streetcars, to everything that's out there. It really ties it all together. So we're looking at those regional connections, statewide, like I mentioned, with the Texas Triangle, and trying to create those mobility options around the state. And then even nationally and internationally with the connections to Amtrak in both Fort Worth and Dallas, as well as DFW Airport potentially with that people mover. A few things to consider, obviously, for Arlington. So one of the big remaining items that Arlington has to do is determine how they're going to commit either to a transit agency, which I'm sure you're all well aware of all of this, or to some sort of local government corporation. The RTCs made it part of their policy that Arlington has to commit to some sort of transit for the transit service for the city of Arlington by the end of the environmental review process. So by around that March 2025 timeframe, in order to get the Arlington station. So if for some reason that did not occur, that would just be a deferred station. So it would still be designed to accommodate it. It's just, it would be a deferred station that you're still talking years down the line before you get into final design and construction. So there still would be a little more time, but it would essentially become a deferred station, and they would start planning it to not have an Arlington station. So, but from what I understand, I'm not privy to all the conversations, but from what I've heard, from your mayor as well as others in the region, is that they're committed to finding a solution here. So we'll see how that plays out. But there is a lot of opportunity here, obviously, with that, not just the high-speed rail connections, but also the connection potentially to the airport through Arlington, all the economic development opportunity around their station area, which of course ties in well with the existing entertainment district there and all of that development that's already built and underway. And then again, just the connections with all the different transportation modes around the region. So next steps, completing phase 2, obviously, getting through the process, having that completed by March of this next year. Then, getting through the preliminary engineering, we'll have that done at the same time frame. At that point, then Council of Governments, RTC, other regional partners can start moving forward with determining who's going to actually implement this thing. That's still to be determined. It's going to require some form of an entity to come in and make this thing actually happen. Is that public? Is it private? Is it some public-private partnership? The latter is more likely. It's probably going to be, if y'all are used to, or if you're aware of the Bright Line West project from connecting LA to Las Vegas with high-speed rail. Bright Line's a private company, but they're working with the federal government. They just got a very large multi-billion-dollar grant to advance that project, and that's now under construction. So you'd probably be looking at a similar situation here. If, of course, Amtrak and Texas Central continue to move their project forward and are successful in implementing the Dallas to Houston high-speed rail, then we could potentially essentially just become an extension of that project. So we coordinate with them regularly. We're monitoring their advancement as they're monitoring ours and just trying to move through the process. Obviously, they're ahead of us, so we're looking to try to play catch up, and that's part of why we're in this environmental process as we speak. Funding, obviously, another thing that's still to be determined. So everyone wants to start looking through your couch cushions, see what change you can find. Maybe we can have a couple bake sales. We'll see what we can gin up. But we're talking about a very large infrastructure project, so it's likely to be a public-private partnership of some sort. And then from there, it's get through final design, construction, and then ultimately we have high-speed rail in North Texas, which is the ultimate goal here. So we're making really good progress on the project development phase of this. Like I said, we'll have it environmentally cleared at the end of March next year. We'll have the preliminary engineering done and really just be set up to then bring other partners to the table who have indicated that, once you get a lot of the potential private partners have said, once you get us past that environmental hurdle and you've got that clearance, then, we'll be a lot more willing to come to the table and talk about how we fund this and getting it into implementation. So with that, that's the end of my presentation. I have contacts here for the Council of Governments' main points of contact. I can provide mine as well. I can send the presentation out and give you my contact information. And then at the bottom, we also have our project website where you can get a lot more information than what you heard today. So I will open it up for Q&A.
It must be really exciting to be working on this.
It really is. It really is. It's a neat project. And like I said, I think earlier, I just got back from the US High Speed Rail Conference in DC. And there's a lot of excitement nationally for high speed rail. Excitement that hasn't, there's people that have wanted this for a really long time. But we're now finally seeing funding happen. We're now seeing projects actually under construction, not just with California, but also with Brightline and between LA and Las Vegas, with Brightline in Florida, with there's a lot of momentum. So it's pretty neat to be part of that process.
Yay.
Now we just have to make it happen. Another Ian has a question.
So I heard a little while back about all of the Dallas City Council talking about moving the Dallas station around and there being kind of a hubbub about that. It's been, at least a few weeks since then. Do you know if there's been kind of any change in the conversation since then? And how would that affect this project, this part of the high-speed rail project, if they do move forward with a change of station?
Sure. So the station itself in Dallas, like I said, that's part of the Dallas to Houston project. It's a set station from, and it's not, again, I can't speak for Amtrak, but what I've heard Andy Byford, who's leading the effort for Amtrak, say is that we're not moving this station. The station's where it's at. We can look at, and we are continuing to work with stakeholders for north of the station. Where does our alignment go, after we leave the Dallas station? But Andy essentially told them, if you start talking about moving the Dallas station, you've killed the project, meaning the Dallas to Houston project. You're talking about a multi-year delay. You're talking about millions of dollars more in study. It's going to fall apart if that's the case. So from what I understand, Dallas is maybe reluctantly, but has said, well, we don't want to lose Dallas to Houston, but let's talk about the extension from Dallas across to Arlington and Fort Worth. So we're continuing to work with the stakeholders. We're continuing to look at other options. We do have some options on the table that we're kind of vetting with the different stakeholders as we speak. So, we're, as Michael Morris has said, we're committed to finding a solution here, and I think we definitely can. It's just going to take a little more time. So, But as far as I understand, the Dallas stations itself is not moving whatsoever, unless they want the project to end, which I know that's not the case. So,
Great, thank you.
And that old station in Dallas is historical, isn't it? The old Union Station.
well, so this is actually the high-speed rail station separate. The Dallas high-speed rail station for the Dallas to Houston project actually comes into this. I don't know if you're familiar with Dallas, the Cedars area. So kind of south of I-30. That southeast corner of I-30 and I-35. There's kind of in that Cedars district area, that's where they're proposing the high-speed rail station. So they're looking at, and we are too, looking at connections to provide pedestrian connections, potentially people mover connection from that station area to the historic Union Station, because Dallas has designated that as their mobility hub. The problem is Union Station just can't accommodate the train cars, the high-speed rail train cars. We're talking about 700-foot long platforms with trains fairly equivalent in length. And you just can't fit that infrastructure in adjacent to Union Station. So that's why they proposed that Cedars area. But they would be looking at sort of like at Love Field or even if DFW, where you got a people mover system, where you've got walkways that are enclosed and air conditioned and convenient for people to transfer back and forth between those two stations. And it is historic, as you said. So we're having to be very careful about working with the city and the historic preservation stakeholders in Dallas to figure out what that would look like without impacting the historic nature of that station.
So Ian, what is if everything went smooth and there weren't any bumps in the road, what's your projected completion time?
I think that if everything went well, if everything aligned up, if others move forward, such as Dallas to Houston, and that all lined up well, that you could potentially ride this project possibly, and it would still be a decade. We're still talking 10 years. I think my personal opinion is that's pretty aggressive, but it could happen. Doesn't mean it's not. You just have to have continued involvement. Obviously, upcoming elections will impact potentially all of high-speed rail throughout the United States, the planned high-speed rail and the funding there. It's going to require public investment to some extent. The private entities will definitely bring money to the table, but for it to truly be successful nationwide, I think it's going to require both. So short version is, I think could be 10 years, but could be more.
Okay, thank you.
I'll follow up on that question with a little bit of a tough question for you.
Sure.
Do you think that this project, maybe either this specific portion or kind of the whole Texas Central Amtrak project, would require state investment, like the state of Texas making a significant investment into the project?
I don't think anyone would necessarily expect that. I mean, of course they would welcome it. I don't think anyone would expect it. So I see it more of a federal investment and private investment. But Texas is changing, so maybe we end up there, but I would not expect you to get much state investment, if any. Part of some of the conversations that had happened previously, before we even started the study, at the state level, there had been some conversations before I got involved, even with Governor Abbott, about high-speed rail, and he's not come out as publicly against it. He's not going to come out and publicly support it either. He just wants to kind of remain silent on it, from what I understand. But he did say, as y'all move these projects forward, try to keep them in existing transportation corridors. So that's obviously it's a good idea, and so that's one of the reasons we really focused in on that in our region. It makes it a lot easier, and one of the things we don't have to contend with that Dallas to Houston does is obviously we're not cutting through any farms, any ranches. We're in an urbanized area, and the fact that we have this major existing transportation infrastructure that we can utilize is huge. So not to say, obviously, we don't have any areas where we have concerns, because that's why we're doing the environmental process, and we do. But it's not to this nearly the same extent as what they're dealing with on, or what they did deal with from Dallas to Houston. So.
Well, maybe it'll happen before I turn 100.
I'm trying my best. Try to get my part done.
Keep up the good work.
Thank you. Has anyone on the call actually used high-speed rail in other countries?
Used it in France, and it was pretty convenient. I was wondering if the stations in Arlington, it'd be the logical thing to serve all the people coming to Cowboys games or going to Six Flags. So the station ought to be on Randall Mill, not I-30, where they'd have to have a struggle to get to the Cowboy Stadium or the Rangers ballpark. So would that be a stadium would be right there on Randall Mill, so it's easy access to all the sports fans?
Yeah, I don't have the more detailed maps that show sort of the zoomed in options we looked at. I just have this one, which doesn't really show. Well, it does kind of. You can see we looked at some options that kind of cut through the entertainment district.
Right,
great.
Super.
The problem you have is that once you start veering off of there, you're severely impacting the speeds. So you're not able to get up to speed. It's a lot easier to work with the city of Arlington and have, the where is it? Have the station here on I-30, and well, where's that better map?
Well, those sporting things are just a few blocks south of I-30, and a little, there could be little cab service at the city. The city could do little car shuttles from the station.
And that's part of what we're talking with not just Arlington, but all the cities is, those last mile connections. So obviously you have a lot of people, as you said, coming here to go to a Cowboys game or to go to a Rangers game. So making that connection is, fairly, at least for Americans, fairly daunting to walk that distance, especially when you don't have the built environment around it. So it's a good point. The problem is it severely of speed, which is what this is all about. We're about trying to get people there as quickly as possible, and then we can work with the local municipalities on, okay, now you're here, people want to go here, how do we make that happen? And so they're looking at options of people mover systems to get people from the station down here. So that's still kind of to be determined, but there would be a seamless connection there where you hop off the station, get on something else, and it takes you directly to where your final destination.
I think where you have it right now, the little orange square, that's pretty close to the area. I've seen people walk from Center Street for a Cowboy game. So they're walking all the way from Center Street all the way down every Sunday. So
they don't want to pay that $75 parking or whatever it is.
or the $200 parking.
Yeah, $200 parking.
Yeah. And people walk from Division down Collins Street. That's pretty good hike.
Well, and part of it too is, so you have that other last mile transportation option that you implement, but if you're in Europe, you walk a mile and it's not a big deal. You barely even realize you did it, and a lot of that's because you have the built environment around you that's inviting, that you look at and you see, oh, there's a museum, there's a restaurant, there's a whatever it might be. It kind of keeps you visually engaged as you walk down that road. And so that's part of it too, is, the station area itself would have major development around it. It's just kind of part of how this works. You got so many people coming in that it attracts developers, and you end up with these major developments. So as that starts to fill in more, and of course I know Arlington already has plans probably for each of these parcels that we're looking at, but that's part of it too. as it kind of keeps you engaged as you make your walk to the stadiums, and you, next thing you know, you're there, don't even realize it, so.
And there's a huge new development that's planned for Lincoln Square with hotels and restaurants and stuff, which will also be part of that environment you're talking about.
Absolutely. And that was actually another location that we had looked at, talking with the city and others, was potentially locating over here, but it ultimately, end of the day, it just made more sense to be more centered over the entertainment district. And they wanted to have access to the north side as well, you know, be able to, you're here in the middle of I-30, you're underground, you could provide pedestrian connections to any of these quadrants. So it really opens up access across the highway.
So I've been following the Dallas to Houston for, I don't know, ever since the beginning, which seems like, I don't know, 10 years ago at least.
Oh, yeah.
And I guess my question is, this being a shorter distance, and we're going from Fort Worth to Dallas, even if the Dallas to Houston never comes through, would they still potentially build the Fort Worth to Dallas?
So I think the technical answer is yes, it could be standalone. The reality is you would, if Dallas to Houston didn't happen, then you would need, you know, one of the other options that I had shown earlier was, you know, council government's looking at Fort Worth down to Austin, San Antonio, Laredo. So it would really require, you know, go in the opposite direction. If Dallas to Houston didn't happen, then you would need that other to happen. I don't think you could do it. I just don't think it would necessarily happen unless you had one of those other larger extensions happen, either to Houston or down I-35. So
Is that because you don't think enough people are traveling from, I guess, Fort Worth to Dallas?
It's kind of like the way we're looking at it is kind of like the interstate highway system. You know, you have urban segments, and even when they were constructing it, they had urban segments under construction before some of the longer distance segments were constructed. You probably wouldn't do that if it was just, if you never had those future extensions. So it really, it's part of a full system is what you're trying to create. Even DART, like with its light rail system, you know, it did do an initial, I think, what was it, Mockingbird Station to downtown Dallas was their very first line that was open. And a lot of people complained at first, you know, well, it doesn't go anywhere. And it's like, well, it's the first part of a system, you know, you got to build the whole thing out. So I think the investment that it would take to do just Dallas to Fort Worth probably would preclude it from happening if it was literally just this segment. Again, you could do it and it would have plenty of benefits. It is a standalone project. It does work on it by itself, and you'd be getting from, you know, if you did the express from Dallas to Fort Worth, you could get there in, you know, under 25 minutes. Which of course we've all traveled 30, and especially during congested times, you never know how long you're going to spend on there. So it would still have a lot of benefits. I just think ultimately the funding wouldn't happen unless you had the larger system planned still.
Well, that route that's going south to San Antonio, does that connect through Fort Worth or through Dallas?
That would connect through Fort Worth. So the way we've designed the Fort Worth station at the moment, it would allow it to turn south and continue along 35. But it could be within, it would probably be, you'd try to stay obviously within the 35W corridor. But of course that's outside of what we're looking at. But we did design it to where it didn't preclude it from turning south and going down 35W. And as I said, you know, the other option obviously is come off of the Houston to Dallas alignment. So, but yeah, if this did not happen, Dallas to Houston, then you would probably need this to happen in order for it to make a lot of sense for us to do it here. But they have good momentum on the Dallas to Houston project. You know, there for a while. Even a year ago, you know, it looked like it was sort of withering on the vine, but there's a lot of renewed interest in it now, and it's really become, you know, Andy Byford, if y'all have heard him speak, you know, he's leading the Amtrak effort with high-speed rail for the entire United States, And he's said in his presentations that Dallas to Houston is their priority corridor. It checks every box of what you're looking for in a high-speed corridor. And that as far as they're concerned, it's their best use case in the United States at the moment. So they're pretty high on Texas in general for high-speed rail. We're kind of, obviously our terrain helps. We don't have a lot, we don't really have mountains in this area. But the distances between the major cities are kind of that sweet spot of what you're looking for. Obviously, if you're doing Houston to Dallas, why would you not want to continue on to Arlington and Fort Worth and connect to other major cities in the region? So.
You mentioned earlier about Arlington needing to get their own kind of transit authority or something similar to take part in this project. What are some other areas that local governments can cooperate with COG on to kind of advance this project?
Other areas you mean outside of?
Yeah, outside of Arlington getting a transit authority.
Oh, if they did not, how else could they make it happen?
Well, I would be interested in that too, but I was just thinking like, what are the other ways that local government can get involved in trying to accelerate the process here and trying to cooperate?
Oh, yeah, I think, yeah, I guess to answer my own question, I don't think there is an option where they get it without some form of, I don't know who knows what that level of investment is, but it's going to have to happen to some extent. But I think from what I understand, hearing the mayor speak and others is that they're very much, they want this to happen. So they want an Arlington station and they're going to, go through what they need to do to get there and work with the other stakeholders in the region and get to a point where it would be at the RTC level where they, as a group say, okay, that's sufficient. And you now get your station. So, I'm not sure beyond those conversations, what necessarily could be done to help push that forward, other than just, obviously any major players in Arlington that y'all might know and putting a bug in their ear that we really want this, because I think that's part of the problem is that, there's been elections after elections that have shown that people are going to vote against transit in Arlington. So how are you, this is a different beast. How do you show people that? How do you tell them this isn't what you're thinking? This isn't a bus running on a local street that's also stuck in traffic. This is a completely different beast. And, trying to education, I guess, would be key, trying to make people understand that.
Well, also, there are a lot of new people in Arlington in the last 5 years who are used to getting where they need to be without having to walk 10 miles or send them a ride. Having some way to get there from here is really going to be a blessing.
Absolutely.
So I'll admit, I've actually voted no a lot on the mass transit in Arlington, but that's mostly because the city has never actually shown what they had planned. They were just like, hey, vote yes or no. And I'll be like, well, no. If you don't have a plan, I'm always going to vote no, because like, I like this plan because it's along the highway or under the highway or over the highway, places that already have transportation. So you don't have to worry about losing streets, Right. Like, I'm already mad at the city for certain apartments that they've put in Arlington that have removed streets from like a 2-lane down to a 1-lane, where you're just causing more traffic. But like stuff like this, where it's along the highway or over it or under it, at least you're not messing with the city traffic where people are trying to get around on a daily basis, or shoving another train in the middle of, you know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's hard to sell a plan if you can't show someone a plan.
Well, what I wonder is, how do local people use this? I can see this for big events going into Dallas. I can see getting from point A to point B, but after you get to these points, right now you can get in your car and go very specifically where you want to go. you get to a station and then you're going to need another bit of cab something to get you specifically where you want to go.
Mhm.
So really, economically, it's better to drive your car if you're a local person.
Mhm. Yeah, and that's
I
part of the next, sorry, go ahead.
And that's why, I mean, I think that's why people don't vote for it, is because how is it going? Yeah, economically, this is great, you know, for the ballpark, for the Rangers, for the Cowboy Stadium people. But for the local people, I mean, I don't know when I would ever use this. I won't live that long, first of all. But really, right now, if this were available, it would not go to any place. I mean, it wouldn't go to any medical center in Dallas. And Fort Worth, I could see they would need something to get them to the stockyards, to get them to Dickey's Arena. Those would be the big places that they would be going in Fort Worth. I can see it as a tourist thing, but for just local people living, and Arlington is so huge and so spread out, how would one little station is, of course, it's not a little station, I understand that, but I don't see how that really, are you going to have to show people how it's going to help them personally, I think.
Let me
Well,
toss in another thought. If you ever are looking at I-30 in rush hours, most of the time, but especially say 8 to 10 in the morning and 3 to 5 in the afternoon, it's a parking lot on that interstate. You can't get there from here in a silly car without risking your neck or getting stuck in a traffic jam. I won't go to any of those cities because I don't want to get on I-30. If I had a train, I'd go to the museums, I'd go to restaurants, stuff like
Well,
that.
this morning I had an appointment in Dallas at the Southwest Medical Center, and this would not be, you know, helpful at all.
Well, you could,
You
if you
know,
had
so,
an Arlington station, you could get on in Arlington, take it to the Dallas station, and then it would connect directly to the DART light rail. And so the light rail, then that would take you to the medical district, but you would have to make a transfer. And I think that's part of that next phase, you know, after working with the cities and saying, okay, where are people trying to go? And how do you get them there? Because that first last mile is huge. You're right. If you can't, it doesn't get you, if you can't get where you're trying to go, then you're not going to use it. And so that's why cities really need to get engaged sooner rather than later and say, okay, if we're going to get this station, let's look at where people are trying to go. We know they're trying to go to the stadiums and all that, but what are the other major, as you mentioned, medical centers? That's an important location. So how do we get those people there and make it easy for them? And so that requires, you know, this is really more of a long distance project, but it does require the cities focusing in on, okay, now how do we help distribute people once they get there? So you're right, that is key. For instance, the A&M was excited because with their Dallas to Houston station, they also now have their law school under construction in downtown Fort Worth, which would be directly above our proposed station in Fort Worth. So you could have students or faculty that literally hop on a train, down in College Station and express up to Fort Worth, and you've got door to door from university to university. So same thing with medical. I mean, you've got a lot of folks who, say go to cancer treatment down in Houston, being able to hop on and just express down there. So it's really about providing those other options. But you're also right. You do have to have those last mile connections figured out where people are trying to go. And it's not suitable for everything. There's gonna be some low density places you're trying to go that probably is just makes more sense to drive. But if you can find those major areas that people are trying to get to, then you can connect them and make it easy and give people a reason to use this instead.
I can't quite remember, but did you say how far the hub is from the Houston, like where the projected Arlington or the Fort Worth to Dallas hub would meet near the Houston to Dallas? Like, are they really close to each other, or?
Where our project would tie in with the Dallas to Houston?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the same station. So they have that proposed station in the Cedars district, and we would tie in directly into their station. So it allows for the opportunity to literally just take a train from Houston to Dallas, you're going to stop there, but that you just sit on your train and then continue along to Arlington and Fort Worth if that same technology is used, which is the plan. So. And that's one of the conversations that's happened out in Dallas is, if you have, they've talked about a tunnel and a underground station in Dallas. And the problem there is you're not connecting into the existing proposed station for the Dallas to Houston project, which is 7 stories in the air. So we have to come in at that same level. So we literally bring our tracks into their station and give that opportunity to just continue on. Otherwise, you're talking about a 17-story transfer where people are having to get off a train, either get on multiple sets of escalators with, a lot of them with luggage if they're traveling longer distances, and trying to get that entire train of people, which is, could be 400 or 500, maybe even 600 people, down all these escalators, down to another train, 17 stories down. It really kills the travel time and makes it not feasible. So we're really trying to show that you need to tie into that station exactly where it's at and allow that 1-seat ride. That's really key.
Well, Ian, we sure appreciate your coming and sharing with us. It's been really interesting. I would
Absolutely.
unmute there, and certainly let's give him a big hand.
Well, thank you. It was good to join y'all and get you up to speed on where we're at. So always welcome. They're always happy to come back and speak again as we get further in the process. So just let us know.
That'll be real helpful. Thank you.
All right. Thank y'all very much. Hope y'all have a good evening.
All
Good
right.
evening. Thank you.
Thank you.